In the quiet farming town of Millbrook, England, in 1885, lived a young woman named Emily Rose, at barely 4 feet and 8 inches tall. Emily had always been the smallest in her family. Her older sisters, Margaret and Catherine, towered over her like gentle giants, their lawn skirts sweeping the ground, while Emily's barely touched her ankles. The local men barely noticed her presence when she walked through the village square, their eyes always searching for a taller, more noticeable young woman. Emily worked at the village bakery owned by Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with flour permanently dusted in her grey hair. Every morning before dawn, Emily would arrive at the bakery, her small hands already knowing exactly what needed to be done. She would knead the heavy dough with surprising strength, her delicate fingers moving like magic as she shaped perfect loaves of bread. When it came time to decorate the wedding cakes and special occasion treats, Emily's artistic touch was unmatched in all of Millbrook, despite her small size. Emily could carry heavy flour sacks that made grown men grunt with effort. She could work longer hours than anyone else in the village, never complaining about tired feet or aching backs. Her hands never shook when piping delicate frosting ruses, and her eye for detail made every cake a masterpiece. But the townspeople only saw what she lacked, not what she possessed. They saw a tiny woman who would never be able to manage a proper household or bear strong children for a hard-working husband. Emily lived in a small cottage with her parents, Robert and Helen Rose, who worried constantly about their youngest daughter's future. Margaret had married a successful merchant from the next town, and Catherine was engaged to the local blacksmith's son. But Emily, sweet and capable as she was, seemed destined to remain alone. The young men of Millbrook wanted wives who could match their height and strength, not someone they would have to look down to see. One chilly autumn morning, as golden leaves danced outside the bakery windows, Emily was cleaning the front counter when she discovered a newspaper that a traveler had left behind. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes fell upon an advertisement that would change her life forever. In bold letters, it read, "Seeking a wife for a ranch life in Colorado Territory, America. Must be hard-working, kind, and ready for frontier living. Looking for a woman of good character who dreams of building a new life in the West. Write to William Thompson, Cedar Ridge, Colorado." Emily's heart began to race with a feeling she had never experienced before, pure possibility. Here was her chance for a new beginning, far from the whispers and pitying looks that followed her through Millbrook's narrow streets. In America, she thought, maybe her size would not matter as much as her heart and her skills. Maybe there was a place where she could be valued for who she truly was inside. For weeks, Emily spent her evenings by candlelight, carefully crafting the perfect letter to William Thompson. She wrote about her skills in cooking, describing how she could make bread that stayed fresh for days and stews that could warm a man's soul after long days of hard work. She shared her talent for sewing, explaining how she could mend any tear and create beautiful quilts that would keep a family warm through the coldest winters. Most importantly, Emily wrote about her dreams of building a home filled with warmth and laughter. She described her vision of a kitchen where delicious smells would always be drifting from the stove, of children's voices echoing through the halls, of a husband coming home each evening to find comfort and peace. Her words came from the deepest parts of her heart, painting pictures of the life she longed to create. Carefully, deliberately, Emily avoided mentioning her height. She hoped that her character would speak louder than her appearance, that William would see her worth in her words rather than her physical stature. She sealed the letter with wax and her most fervent prayers, then walked to the post office with trembling hands. Weeks passed like months as Emily waited for a reply every day. She would hurry to the post office after work, her heart sinking. when there was no letter waiting for her. But finally, on a grey December morning, the postmaster handed her an envelope with American stamps, and her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. William's reply was everything Emily had hoped for, and more. He wrote that he was impressed by her letter, that he could sense her kind heart and strong work ethic in every word. He agreed to marry her and invited her to come to Cedar Ridge as soon as possible. He even sent money to help with her travel expenses, showing a generosity that made Emily's eyes fill with grateful tears. Emily felt her world brighten like the sun breaking through storm clouds. She used every penny of her savings, combined with William's gift, to buy passage to America. She spent her final weeks in Millbrook packing her few belongings and a trunk filled with quilts she had saved. When by candlelight over the years, each quilt told a story of her hopes and dreams, stitched together with threads of possibility as her ship sailed away from England's shores on a misty January morning. Emily stood at the rail watching her homeland disappear into the grey horizon. She whispered a prayer to the ocean winds, asking for courage and blessing on her journey. She was no longer just the small girl from Millbrook who was overlooked and undervalued. She was a woman chasing her dreams across an ocean, believing with all her heart that somewhere in the vast American frontier she would finally find where she belonged. The train journey across America filled Emily with wonder and worry in equal measure. For 3 long days and nights she pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape change from bustling eastern cities to endless prairies, then to rolling hills, and finally to the dramatic mountains of Colorado Territory. Each mile brought her closer to her new life, but also to the moment of truth that made her stomach twist with nervous knots. What would William say when he saw her? Would he accept her as she was? Or would her secret be too much to bear? Emily had practiced what she would say 100 times during the journey. She would smile warmly, show him her letters, and prove through her actions that size did not determine worth. She carried her small mirror in her handbag, checking her appearance constantly and smoothing her brown hair beneath her modest bonnet. Her best blue dress, the one she had sewn herself with tiny pearl buttons, fit her perfectly and made her feel as confident as possible. As the train pulled into Cedar Ridge Station with a great hiss of steam and grinding of metal, Emily's heart began to pound so hard she thought other passengers might hear it. Through the dusty window, the town appeared like something from a dream she had never dared to have. Wooden buildings with wide front porches lined a dirt street that was much wider than any road in me. A brook. Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks touched with snow that sparkled in the afternoon sun like diamonds. Cowboys on horseback moved slowly down the street, and women in simple dresses swept their front steps. Emily gathered her courage, smoothed her best blue dress one final time, and stepped onto the wooden platform. The air was thinner here than in England, and the sun felt warmer on her face despite the cool mountain breeze. She clutched her small handbag tightly and looked round for the man who was supposed to become her husband, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and work-worn hands approached, his eyes scanning the crowd of passengers who were collecting their belongings. He wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, and Emily could see that he had made an effort to look presentable for their meeting. His hair was combed back neatly, and his boots were polished despite the dusty streets. "Are you Emily Rose?" he asked, his voice carrying hope and expectation as he looked over the heads of other passengers, clearly searching for someone taller. Emily took a deep breath and looked up at him with what she hoped was a confident smile. "Yes, I am," she replied, her English accent clear in the mountain air. William's face changed instantly, as if someone had slapped him. His hopeful expression crumbled into disappointment, his eyes widening with shock as he realized that the tiny woman before him was indeed his intended bride. Then his face hardened into something cruel and cold that made Emily's blood turn to ice in her veins. "This cannot be right," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the platform and drawing stares from other passengers who were still gathering their luggage. "I asked for a wife who could handle ranch work. You are far too small. This will not do at all." The words hit Emily like physical blows, each one landing in her chest and stealing her breath away. Round them, people began to whisper behind their hands and point in her direction. A woman in a brown dress nearby shook her head in pity, her expression showing the kind of sympathy that made Emily feel even smaller. A man in a black suit chuckled unkindly, as if Emily's situation was somehow amusing to him. Emily felt her cheeks burn with shame as William continued his rejection for all to hear, his voice getting louder and more cruel with each word. Other passengers stopped their conversations to listen, and she could feel their eyes on her like weights pressing down on her shoulders. "I cannot marry someone so tiny," William declared, gesturing at her as if she was something unpleasant he had found on his boot. "You would be useless on the ranch. You could not even reach the top shelves in the kitchen, let alone help with the cattle or horses. This marriage is impossible." Without another word, William turned on his heel and walked away, his boots clicking loudly on the wooden platform as he left Emily standing alone with her trunk and her shattered dreams scattered round her feet. Like broken glass, the other passengers began to move away, some shaking their heads in sympathy, others still whispering about the strange scene they had witnessed. Emily stood frozen in place, too shocked and humiliated to move, tears threatening to spill from her eyes despite her determination not to cry in public. The station master, an elderly man with kind grey eyes and a gentle face lined with years of watching both happy reunions and sad partings, approached Emily carefully. He had seen the entire exchange and felt his heart break for the small young woman who had travelled so far only to face such cruelty. "Come along, miss," he said softly, picking up her heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Let me help you to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson will take good care of you." Double quotes Mrs. Patterson. The boarding house owner was a stern woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She reluctantly agreed to let Emily stay, but Emily could see the doubt in her eyes as she looked her up and down, clearly wondering how such a tiny person would ever manage to pay for her room and meals. That night, lying on the narrow bed in her small room, Emily wept silently into her pillow. She had travelled so far, spent every penny she had, and left everything familiar behind, only to discover that even an ocean away from Millbrook, the world still measured her worth by her size rather than her heart. Days passed slowly in Cedar Ridge like honey dripping from a spoon. Emily woke each morning in her small room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, determined to make the best of her situation despite the crushing disappointment that still weighed on her heart like a heavy stone. She took on small jobs wherever she could find them, mending torn clothes for the seamstress shop, helping Mr. Morrison organize shelves at the general store, and baking fresh bread and sweet pastries for the local cafe owned by a kind woman named Mrs. Thompson. The work was honest, but the pay was small, barely enough to cover her room and simple meals. Emily counted every penny carefully, knowing that she had no family to send her money if she ran short. The townspeople were polite enough when they spoke to her, tipping their hats and saying good morning, but she could feel their distance like a cold wind. They were unsure what to make of the tiny Englishwoman who had been so publicly rejected at the train station. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, but none with the warmth of true friendship. Emily tried not to let their distant politeness hurt her feelings, but some nights she lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the town settling down for a sleep and wondered if she would ever truly belong anywhere. She missed the familiar smells of Mrs. Henderson's bakery back in Millbrook, missed the way her mother would hum while cooking dinner, missed even the gentle teasing of her tall sisters. It was at Morrison's general store, while she was carefully arranging canned goods on the high shelves using a wooden step stool, that Emily first met James Bennet. He was a quiet man in his 30s, with gentle brown eyes the color of rich coffee and calloused hands that spoke of honest hard work. His dark hair was always neatly combed, and his clothes, though simple, were always clean and well mended, unlike the other ranchers who came into the store and barely acknowledged her presence, looking right over her head as if she were invisible. James always nodded politely when he saw her. He would touch the brim of his hat respectfully and ask about her day in a voice that was soft and kind. Sometimes he even complimented her work, noticing when she had organized a display particularly well or when the bread she had baked from Mrs. Thompson's cafe smelled especially delicious. Emily learned from listening to conversations in the store that James owned a small horse ranch about 3 miles outside of town. He lived there with his 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, who had the same gentle brown eyes as her father. James's wife, Mary, had died 2 years earlier from a terrible fever that had swept through the town, leaving father and daughter to navigate their deep grief alone. Emily had seen Lucy a few times when James brought her to town for supplies. The little girl, like Emily, was smaller than other children her age, with delicate features and long brown hair that her father tried his best to braid but never quite managed to make neat. Lucy had become quiet and withdrawn after losing a mother, clinging close to her father's side and rarely speaking to anyone else. One warm afternoon in late spring, as Emily was ranging new bolts of colorful fabric on the store shelves, she overheard James talking quietly to Mr. Morrison near the counter. His voice was filled with worry and exhaustion as he explained his troubles. "I do not know what to do anymore, Morrison," James was saying, running his rough hand through his hair. "The ranch house has fallen into such neglect without Mary's care. Dust covers everything. Dishes pile up in the kitchen sink, and I can barely manage to keep our clothes clean while working with the horses all day. But worst of all, Lucy barely speaks anymore. She needs a woman's gentle touch. Someone who understands what it means to care for a home and a hurting child." Emily's heart began to race with something she had not felt since stepping off the train. Hope. Here was a man who needed exactly the skills she possessed. A little girl who might understand what it felt like to be different and alone. And a home that needed the kind of love and attention she was desperate to give. "Excuse me," Emily said quietly, stepping forward with her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure both men could hear it. "I could not help but overhear your conversation. I have much experience managing homes and caring for children. Perhaps I could help you with your situation." James turned to look at her, and for a long moment he studied her face carefully. Unlike William Thompson, who had seen only her small size, James seemed to see something that others had missed. He saw the strength that lived behind her gentle blue eyes, the determination that had carried her across an entire ocean to start a new life, and the kindness that radiated from her like warmth from a fireplace. "Would you truly be willing to try?" James asked, his voice filled with cautious hope. "I must be honest with you. The work would not be easy. The house needs much attention. And Lucy has been very difficult since her mother passed away. She does not trust easily anymore." Emily looked into his kind eyes and felt something settle in her chest, like a bird finally finding a safe place to land after a long, difficult flight. "I understand loss, Mr. Bennet," she replied softly, thinking of her own journey and all the rejection she had faced, and I believe that healing often comes through caring for others. The next morning, as the sun painted the mountain peaks with golden light, Emily packed her few belongings and moved to the Bennett Ranch. The house was indeed in need of much attention. Dust covered every piece of furniture like grey snow. Dirty dishes sat stacked in the kitchen sink, and everywhere she looked, she could see the absence of a woman's loving care. But Emily also saw something wonderful, possibility. This was not just a job or a place to stay. This was a chance to build something beautiful from broken pieces, to create a real home where healing could begin. Emily transformed the Bennett household with the same gentle magic she had once brought to the Millbrook Bakery back in England. From the moment she stepped through the front door of the ranch house, she could see exactly what needed to be done. She rolled up her sleeves and began working with the kind of quiet determination that had always been her greatest strength. She started by opening all the windows to let fresh mountain air sweep through the rooms that had been closed up with grief for too long. Dust had settled on everything like a grey blanket, covering the furniture, the picture frames, and even the books on the shelves. Emily cleaned each item carefully, polishing the wooden table where James and Lucy ate their meals until it gleamed in the sunlight. She organized the kitchen cupboards, washed every dish and cup, and scrubbed the floors until they sparkled. But more than just cleaning, Emily began cooking the kind of hearty, nourishing meals that the Bennett family had not enjoyed since Mary's death. She made thick stews that filled the house with wonderful smells, fresh bread that was still warm when James came in from working with the horses, and sweet pies made from wild berries she found growing near the creek. Every meal was prepared with love and served at the proper time, bringing structure and comfort back to their daily lives. Most importantly, Emily slowly began reaching out to the grieving child who so desperately needed a mother's love, but was too hurt and scared to accept it easily. Lucy was indeed a challenge, just as James had warned. The little girl with her sad brown eyes and tangled hair rejected Emily's attempts at friendship with the stubborn determination of someone who had been hurt too deeply to trust again. Lucy spoke only when absolutely necessary, answering Emily's cheerful questions with single words or simple nods. She often disappeared into her small bedroom for hours at a time, emerging only for meals that she ate in silence. When Emily tried to help her with her hair or suggested they work together in the garden, Lucy would shake her head and retreat even further into herself. But Emily understood this behavior better than most people would have. She had also felt different, overlooked, and alone for most of her life. She knew what it was like to build walls round your heart to protect yourself from being hurt again. Instead of forcing conversation or trying to make Lucy talk before she was ready, Emily decided to show love through quiet actions that spoke louder than any words could. She carefully mended Lucy's torn dresses, sewing each rib with tiny, perfect stitches and adding small decorative touches like embroidered flowers or pretty ribbons. She baked Lucy's favorite cookies, which she learned about by watching what the little girl chose to eat first from the dinner table. When bedtime came, Emily would sit outside Lucy's closed door and tell gentle stories about her life in England, about the green fields and the village bakery, about her sisters and the funny things that happened in Millbrook. Week by week, Emily's patient kindness began to work its magic. Lucy started helping with small tasks round the house, carrying dishes to the kitchen or feeding the chickens that pecked round the yard. She began asking quiet questions about England, wanting to know about the ocean Emily had crossed and whether it was true that it rained more there than in Colorado. Most wonderfully of all, Emily sometimes caught Lucy smiling when she thought no one was looking. The real breakthrough came on a sunny afternoon when Emily found Lucy sitting behind the barn, crying as if her heart was broken all over again. When Emily gently asked what was wrong, Lucy sobbed that some children in town had teased her about being so small, calling her names and saying she looked like a baby compared to other 8-year-olds. Emily sat down in the dirt beside Lucy, not caring that her clean dress would get dusty. "You know," she said softly, putting her arm round the little girl's shaking shoulders, "being small is not the same as being weak. Some of the strongest people I have ever known could fit in your pocket if pockets were big. Enough real strength comes from here." She touched Lucy's chest gently, right over her heart. "Not from how tall you stand or how big your body is, from that day forward." Lucy and Emily became true companions in every sense of the word. The little girl's laughter returned like music after a long silence, filling the house with the kind of joy that had been missing for far too long. She would run to greet Emily each morning, help with the cooking and cleaning, and chatter excitedly about everything she had seen and done. James watched this amazing transformation with wonder and growing admiration. Emily's small size, which people like William Thompson had seen as a terrible weakness, actually allowed her to connect with Lucy in ways that a larger person never could have managed. She could crawl under beds to retrieve lost toys without difficulty, fit into small spaces to clean thoroughly, and somehow made everything in the house work perfectly despite her petite stature. Evenings became the most precious times of all for their little family. After dinner was finished and the dishes were washed, Emily would settle into the comfortable chair by the fireplace with a book in her hands. James would sit in his favorite chair nearby, and Lucy would curl up on the soft rug between them. Emily's clear, musical voice would fill the room as she read stories of adventure and romance, of brave heroes and kind princesses, while the fire crackled warmly and cast dancing shadows on the walls. James found himself looking forward to coming home each evening after long days of working with the horses, knowing that Emily's warm smile and Lucy's excited chatter would greet him at the door, slowly, like the sun rising over the mountains. James began to realize that what he felt for Emily was much more than simple gratitude for her help with his household and Dot. It was love, pure and honest and deep, growing stronger with each passing day. 1 year after Emily's arrival in Cedar Ridge, the small mountain town had completely changed its opinion of the tiny English woman who had once been so cruelly rejected at the train station. What had started as polite but distant curiosity had blossomed into genuine love and respect from nearly everyone in the community. Emily had become beloved at the white wooden church that sat on the hill overlooking the town. Her beautiful singing voice, clear and sweet as mountain spring water, now led the choir every Sunday morning, when she stood on the small platform in her simple dress, her voice soaring through the hymns. Even the roughest cowboys in the back pews would remove their hats and listen with tears in their eyes. The pastor often said that Emily's voice could make angels weep with joy. Her baking had become legendary throughout Cedar Ridge and the surrounding ranches. Every town celebration, from harvest festivals to wedding parties, featured Emily's delicious creations. Her apple pies were so perfect that women would travel from neighboring towns just to learn her secrets. Her bread was so soft and flavorful that the general store stopped ordering from the big bakery in Denver because everyone wanted only what Emily made. Most importantly of all, Emily had brought the Bennett family completely back to life. James had gained weight and color in his cheeks, no longer looking like the tired, grieving widow who had struggled alone for so long. Lucy had grown into a bright, cheerful child whose laughter could be heard echoing across the ranch as she helped Emily with the garden and played with the barn cats. But William Thompson had been watching Emily's transformation and success with growing interest and bitter regret. His own ranch had failed completely over the past year. The cattle had gotten sick, the crops had failed due to drought, and his debts had mounted like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. he faced losing everything he owned, including the land that had been in his family for generations. Seeing how Emily had been accepted and celebrated by the entire community, seeing how happy and prosperous the Bennet family had become under her care, William began to believe that he had made a terrible mistake. In his mind, Emily still belonged to him according to their original agreement. He convinced himself that if he could claim her as his wife, her skills and the community's respect for her would somehow save his failing match on a bright Sunday morning in late spring. After church services had ended and people were gathering in the churchyard to visit and share news, William Thompson made his move. He had dressed in his best clothes and combed his hair carefully, trying to look like the successful rancher he had once been rather than the desperate man he had become. Emily was standing near the church steps with James and Lucy, laughing at something Lucy had whispered in her ear. When William approached them with determined steps, the conversations round them began to quiet as people noticed William walking toward Emily with a strange look on his face. Emily rose. William announced loudly, his voice carrying across the entire churchyard so that everyone could hear him. Clearly, I have reconsidered our original arrangement. I realize now that I made an error in judgment when you first arrived. I am willing to honor our agreement and marry you as we planned. The townspeople fell completely silent, shocked by his boldness and the inappropriate timing of his declaration. Children stopped playing and looked up at the adults with curious eyes. Even the birds seemed to stop singing as William's words hung in the mountain air like smoke from a fire. Emily felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up her neck and into her cheeks, the same feeling she had experienced that terrible day at the train station. But this time, something was completely different. She was no longer the frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off the train with nothing but hope and a trunk full of quilts. She had found her place, her purpose, and most importantly, her worth. Mr. Thompson, Emily replied clearly, her voice carrying across the silent churchyard with quiet strength and dignity. I am no longer available for such arrangements. I have found my place in this world. And it is not with someone who judges a person's worth by their size alone and only recognizes their value when it becomes convenient. James stepped forward, his work-worn hand gently taking Emily's smaller one, with Lucy moving to stand beside them like the family they had become. Emily, he said, his voice filled with emotion that made it shake slightly. I have loved you for many months now, but was too afraid to speak the words. You have brought life back to our home and joy back to our hearts when we thought we would never feel happiness again. Would you honor me by becoming my wife? Not from any arrangement or convenience, but from pure love. Emily looked up at this gentleman who had seen her worth from the very beginning, who had never once made her feel small or inadequate. She looked at Lucy, who had become the daughter of her heart, the child she had helped heal and who had helped heal her in return. Round them stood the entire community that had learned to value her contributions and love her exactly as she was. She was no longer alone, no longer unwanted, no longer measuring her worth by other people's standards. Yes, James, she said, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. Yes, with all my heart and soul. Their wedding 3 weeks later was the celebration that Cedar Ridge had been waiting for. Emily wore a dress of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, working by lamplight. In the evenings to create something beautiful, Lucy scattered rose petals as her maid of honor, her face glowing with happiness. As Emily and James exchanged vows of love and devotion, Emily realized that her long journey across the ocean had not been about finding someone who would accept her despite her size. It had been about finding people who loved her exactly as she was, perfectly made and wonderfully complete. The end.